By the time Isabella Laurent entered the restaurant that evening, the air had already changed. It was subtle at first, the way conversations softened mid-sentence, the way silverware paused halfway to lips, the way the maitre d' straightened as if a string had been pulled through his spine. The chandeliers above cast warm light over marble floors and velvet-backed chairs, but wherever Isabella stepped, the glow seemed to sharpen, turning from ambiance into spotlight. She did not rush. Power never rushed. Her emerald silk gown skimmed the floor like liquid glass, catching the light with each measured step. Diamonds rested against her collarbone, tasteful, but unmistakably expensive. Her dark hair was swept into a low chignon, not a strand misplaced. Behind her trailed two assistants murmuring about tomorrow's gala and the restaurant manager, Mr. Caldwell, whose smile looked as though it had been glued on moments before. Table 16, Isabella said without looking at him. Of course, Mrs. Laurent, Caldwell replied, already gesturing for a busser to pull out the chair. At table 16 sat Victor Laurent, who had arrived earlier. The millionaire himself. He rose politely as his wife approached, pressing a kiss to her cheek. To the untrained eye, they were the picture of elegance. To those who observed carefully, there was something else, an imbalance. Victor's posture bent slightly inward, while Isabella's remained perfectly upright. You're late, she said softly, though her tone carried an edge. Traffic, he answered. Board meeting ran long. She sat, smoothing her gown. They should learn to run it efficiently. Across the room, waitstaff whispered in tense clusters. She's here. Who's serving? Caldwell scanned the floor like a general assessing troops. His gaze landed on Elena Morales. Elena stood near the service station, polishing a wine glass with steady hands. She had been working at the restaurant for only 3 days, but she had already learned the rhythm of the place, the silent hierarchy, the glances that passed between servers when certain names appeared on reservations. Elena, Caldwell said, lowering his voice as he approached her. Table 16 is yours. A nearby waitress sucked in a breath. That's Mrs. Laurent. Elena looked toward the table. I gathered. You don't understand, the other waitress whispered urgently. She once sent back water. Water? Elena asked mildly. It wasn't cold enough. Elena set down the glass. Then we'll make sure it's cold. Caldwell studied her face, searching for nerves. He found none. Be attentive, and for heaven's sake, don't argue. I don't plan to. She picked up 2 menus and walked toward table 16. With each step, she felt the shift in atmosphere, the way other diners subtly leaned in, pretending not to watch. Elena had grown up reading rooms like this. Her mother had worked housekeeping in hotels where wealthy guests believed invisibility came with a uniform. Elena had learned early that silence could be armor, and composure could be sharper than any raised voice. She stopped beside the table. Good evening. Welcome back, Mrs. Laurent. Mr. Laurent. Isabella's gaze lifted slowly. It was not a glance, it was an assessment. Head to toe. Shoes polished but modest. Uniform crisp. No trembling hands. You're new, Isabella observed. Yes, ma'am. We prefer experienced staff. I'll make sure your experience tonight reflects that, Elena replied smoothly. Victor's eyes flicked upward at the confidence in her tone. Isabella accepted the menu but did not open it. Sparkling water. Imported, not domestic. Of course. And ensure it's properly chilled. Yes, ma'am. Elena turned to leave. And one more thing. She stopped and faced her again. You forgot to ask how I prefer my napkin folded. A faint ripple of discomfort passed through the nearby tables. Elena's expression remained serene. My apologies. Standard fold, or would you prefer the European fan? For the first time, Isabella hesitated. The fan. Certainly. When Elena walked away, Victor exhaled under his breath. You're testing her already. I'm observing, Isabella replied coolly. Standards matter. The first course arrived without flaw. The sparkling water was chilled precisely, condensation beaded along the glass. Elena poured with a steady hand, placing the bottle label outward, angled correctly. Isabella took a sip. A pause. No criticism. She moved on to the appetizer. The plating seems crowded. It reflects Chef Adrian's winter presentation, Elena explained gently. He wanted a harvest aesthetic. Did he? Isabella said dryly. If you prefer minimalism, I can request a simplified arrangement. The offer was sincere, not defensive. Victor hid a small smile behind his wine glass. As the meal progressed, Isabella's remarks grew sharper. The lighting feels dimmer than usual. We adjusted it for the evening snowfall, Elena replied. It reduces glare against the windows. And the music. Debussy, ma'am. I recognize Debussy. I assumed you might. That almost smile again. It was faint, but it was there. Nearby diners exchanged glances. They were accustomed to Isabella's dominance, to watching servers shrink under her scrutiny. But this one did not shrink. She did not flare up either. She simply remained. When the risotto arrived, steam curling upward, Isabella lifted her fork and tasted it. A beat. This is under-seasoned. Caldwell stiffened across the room. Elena stood poised beside the table. I tasted it before serving. It follows Chef Adrian's signature balance, subtle salt to highlight the truffle oil. However, I can bring shaved pecorino or cracked sea salt if you prefer a sharper finish. The phrasing was careful, respectful, but it was also firm. Isabella lowered her fork slowly. Are you suggesting my palate is incorrect? Not at all, Elena replied. Only that taste is personal. The surrounding tables had gone nearly silent. Isabella leaned forward slightly. Do you know who I am? Yes, Elena said calmly. You are one of this restaurant's most valued guests. Then you understand that I expect excellence. And I intend to provide it. The words did not waver. Victor set down his glass, studying Elena more openly now. There was no mockery in her face. No fear, only quiet assurance. For a fraction of a second, something flickered across Isabella's expression, uncertainty, perhaps. Or irritation at not finding weakness where she expected it. Bring the cheese, she said at last. Yes, ma'am. Elena walked away, spine straight. As she moved between tables, she felt the weight of eyes following her, not judgmental, but curious. Hopeful, even. She knew what they saw, someone standing where others had bowed. Back at table 16, Victor spoke softly. You could let one thing go. I never let things go, Isabella replied. That's how people lose control. Control of what? She didn't answer. Elena returned with a small silver dish of pecorino and a fresh grinder of sea salt. She shaved the cheese delicately over the risotto, movements precise. The scent of truffle and sharp dairy rose between them. There, she said quietly. Please let me know if it's to your liking. Isabella tasted again. This time, she did not comment. But her gaze lingered on Elena a moment longer than necessary. Not with dismissal, with calculation. The rest of the meal unfolded in taut civility. Dessert was presented flawlessly, espresso poured with crema intact. No tremor, no mistake. When the check arrived, Victor reached for it. Automatically, Isabella stood. Competent, she said coolly, looking at Elena. We'll see if it lasts. Elena inclined her head. I look forward to serving you again. It was not a challenge. It was a statement. As Isabella turned and crossed the restaurant floor, the invisible pressure seemed to lift slightly behind her. Conversations resumed. Laughter returned in cautious bursts. But at table 16, something had shifted. For the first time in years, Isabella Laurent had met someone who did not fear her. And though she would never admit it, not to Victor, not to herself, it unsettled her far more than any complaint about risotto ever could. The following Friday, the reservation for table 16 appeared at precisely 4 in the afternoon. No one needed to read the name twice. She's coming back, one of the servers whispered, as if announcing a storm warning. Mr. Caldwell adjusted his tie for the third time in 10 minutes. All right, let's maintain composure tonight. No mistakes. In the corner of the prep station, Elena tied her apron with the same unhurried precision she brought to everything else. She had expected this. People like Isabella Laurent did not walk away from unfinished impressions. They returned. They reasserted. They tested again. Elena did not resent her for it. She understood it. At 7:30 sharp, the restaurant doors opened, and Isabella stepped inside. This time, she wore black. Not the soft black of velvet or lace, but structured satin that caught the light like polished obsidian. A thin diamond bracelet circled her wrist. Her expression was composed, unreadable. Victor followed a half-step behind, offering polite nods to the maitre d'. The atmosphere shifted again, but differently now. Less fear, more anticipation. Elena approached before Caldwell could intervene. Good evening, Mrs. Laurent. Mr. Laurent, she said smoothly. Your usual sparkling water has already been chilled. And Chef Adrian prepared the risotto with a slightly brighter seasoning profile tonight. Isabella paused mid-step. You anticipated my preferences. I remembered them. Victor smiled faintly. Impressive. They were seated. Elena poured the water with steady hands. Isabella watched her closely, not searching for mistakes this time, but searching for something else. A crack. An eagerness to please. A sign of insecurity. She found none. So, Isabella began lightly as she unfolded her napkin, standard fold this time. Tell me, Elena, how long do you intend to stay here? As long as I'm needed. That's vague. I find flexibility useful. Isabella tilted her head. You speak like someone who's been educated. I have. In hospitality. No. A pause lingered between them. What, then? Isabella asked. I studied classical literature. The words were simple, but they carried weight. Victor looked up sharply. Where? Universidad de Salamanca. I was on scholarship. Caldwell, hovering nearby, nearly collided with a passing busser. Isabella's eyes narrowed, not in disbelief, but in recalibration. And yet you're serving tables. My father required surgery last year, Elena said evenly. Scholarships don't cover hospital bills. Victor's expression softened. Isabella tapped her manicured nails against the rim of her glass. So this is temporary. Everything is, Elena replied. The faintest spark flickered in Isabella's gaze. The first course arrived flawlessly. Conversation around them resumed cautiously, though nearby diners clearly strained to overhear. Isabella took a bite of her salad, chewing thoughtfully. You don't seem resentful. Of what? Of this. She gestured vaguely at the dining room. Serving people who likely had far fewer obstacles than you. Elena considered her answer carefully. Resentment assumes comparison. I try not to compare journeys. Naive, Isabella murmured. Peaceful, Elena corrected gently. Victor's lips twitched, as though suppressing a smile. The tension was not explosive tonight. It was surgical. Isabella probing with precise questions, Elena responding with calm clarity. The power dynamic felt less like predator and prey, and more like a chess match. Halfway through the entree, the inevitable happened. A sharp crash split the air near the bar. A young waiter, Daniel, barely 20, had misjudged the edge of a rug. His tray tilted, and 6 crystal wine glasses shattered against the marble floor. Red wine splashed across the tiles in a dramatic bloom. One shard skidded alarmingly close to Isabella's chair. Gasps rippled across the room. Daniel froze, his face draining of color. I'm so sorry. Isabella stood abruptly, chair scraping. Unbelievable. Absolute incompetence. The restaurant fell silent. Caldwell rushed forward, already pale. Mrs. Laurent, I assure you. But Elena was faster. She stepped between Isabella and the spreading mess. Are you hurt? The directness of the question halted Isabella mid-breath. No, she said stiffly. Please remain seated a moment. Elena crouched carefully beside Daniel. Step back, she murmured to him, her voice low enough that only he could hear. It's all right. Breathe. Daniel swallowed hard and obeyed. Elena began gathering the larger shards with deliberate care, using a folded linen napkin to shield her hands. She positioned herself subtly between Isabella's gown and the wine-stained floor, protecting the satin from splashes. The room watched, not the accident anymore, but her. You could cut yourself, Isabella said coolly. I won't. You're not maintenance staff. I'm staff, Elena replied simply. Caldwell hurried over with gloves and a broom, but Elena had already contained the worst of the damage. She stood, smoothing her apron as if nothing extraordinary had occurred. Daniel's hands trembled visibly. Isabella looked at him. What's your name? Daniel, ma'am. How long have you worked here? 3 months. She held his gaze a moment longer than necessary. Everyone expected it, the public reprimand, the icy dismantling. Instead, Isabella turned her eyes back to Elena. You intervened quickly. It seemed necessary. To protect him. To protect everyone, Elena said. Victor rose slowly from his chair. Accidents happen, he added quietly. Isabella glanced at her husband. There was something in his expression she hadn't seen in a long time, disapproval, perhaps. Or quiet fatigue. The silence stretched. Then Isabella did something unexpected. She sat back down. Finish cleaning, she instructed Caldwell evenly. And bring fresh glasses. Caldwell blinked. Yes, Mrs. Laurent. The collective tension in the room eased slightly, though all eyes remained fixed on table 16. As Elena resumed her position, Isabella studied her carefully. You embarrassed me last week, Isabella said, her tone measured. I spoke honestly, Elena replied. You made me look unreasonable. I didn't intend to, but you did. A beat passed between them. And yet, Isabella continued slowly, you shielded my dress just now. Yes. Why? Elena met her gaze without hesitation. Because professionalism isn't selective. The words landed heavily. Victor exhaled softly. Isabella leaned back in her chair, examining the young woman before her, not as staff, not as background, but as someone with substance. You're not afraid of me, she observed. Elena's answer was quiet. Should I be? Around them, diners leaned forward ever so slightly. Isabella opened her mouth, perhaps to assert, perhaps to remind the room who she was. Instead, she stopped. For the first time in years, she felt the edges. of something unfamiliar pressing against her carefully constructed armor. Not defiance. Reflection. She glanced at Daniel, who stood stiffly near the bar, waiting for his fate. Daniel, she called. He jumped. Yes, ma'am. Be more careful. Yes, ma'am. And stop looking like you're awaiting execution. A few quiet chuckles escaped nearby tables. Color returned to Daniel's face. Isabella turned to Caldwell. Ensure proper training. Broken glass is expensive. Yes, Mrs. Laurent. Then she faced Elena again. You made me look ridiculous, Isabella said bluntly. The restaurant seemed to inhale. Elena remained still. That was not my intention. Nevertheless, a long pause followed. And I dislike being ridiculous. I imagine most people do. Victor laughed softly under his breath. Isabella shot him a look, but it lacked venom. Finally, she lifted her glass. You have standards, she said. And composure. Thank you. It's irritating. A ripple of restrained amusement moved through the room. Isabella set her glass down with a decisive click. Caldwell. Yes. Give her a raise. Caldwell blinked rapidly. A raise, ma'am. She understands service better than most of your senior staff. Elena felt warmth rise to her cheeks, not embarrassment, but something steadier. Respect. Victor's expression softened openly now. Isabella stood, gathering her purse. As she passed Elena, she paused. Next week, she said quietly, so only Elena could hear, you'll recommend the wine. Elena allowed herself a small smile. I'd be honored. Isabella studied her one last time, not as a threat, not as opposition. As equal ground. Then she walked toward the exit. This time, when the doors closed behind her, the restaurant did not exhale in relief. It buzzed with something brighter. Because the most feared woman in the city had not been defeated. She had been met. And for the first time, she had chosen not to crush what stood before her, but to acknowledge it.